Jurassic Safari World, an amusement park and experience for people around the entire globe to finally have a chance and see living dinosaurs up close and personal from the comfort of their own car. Ever since the completion of the park, guests have been flooding in and business has been going great. Despite some hiccups, including a hybrid dinosaur known as the Spinoraptor, everything else mostly went smooth. The park had a great variety of dinosaurs to behold. Over 50 species were represented, and shortcuts were provided for those seeking a little bit less of a thrilling experience, as some found the huge predators a bit scary to see that close. The park differed with the first Jurassic Zoo created by Konoha a long time ago. People opted for a new proper zoo to be made, and plans were already in the making, but it still would take time to prepare. In the meantime, the people could enjoy the dinosaurs like never before, from the biggest giants to the smallest of critters. The audience were even included in naming the dinosaurs if they were pronounced a couple or when a new baby dinosaur was born. There were still parts of the island that were considered to be off limits, since the dinosaurs took over the island once they escaped from the zoo and had evolved into their own working ecosystem, complete with a hierarchy including an apex predator. With man taking back control, the dinosaurs that were left to roam the wild grew more shy as the loud noise and smells were unappealing to them. By now, some of the people had laid their eyes upon types that they had seen ever since the first park was erected, including of course the T-Rex, Velociraptors, Triceratops, and Stegosaurus. But there were always rumors of dinosaurs that were kept secret behind the curtain. Through extensive artificial change with the dinosaur genomes, things could be manipulated, including how docile the predators were. The site where this was done was the so-called Site 10, Location E. Many of the hybrids came from this area, and all docile carnivores were brought through here as well. But what exactly was Site 10, Location E? And what was occurring at the other sites and locations? Interestingly enough, word came out from an area known as Site 10, Location B, which was a much smaller area of operations than Location E. B, among others, was where two carnivores were being created during the building of the safari park. Unfortunately, through complications within the DNA strand, the two carnivores were not completed in time before the park's opening, and the route had been laid just so that no more dinosaurs could be added. Location B had, as every other location, specific teams of both scientists and security assigned to them to keep things on the down low. Since dinosaur creation was done at Location B, reports came fairly frequent, unlike some other sites and locations where people even whispered they were doing absolute horrid things to both the animals and the personnel. In Site 10, Location B, the first of the two carnivores was the Proceratosaurus, a small two-legged dinosaur from the Middle Jurassic period. Its nasal crest was its most distinct feature, though it possessed a very lanky and slim figure despite being an ancient relative of the Tyrannosaurus rex. Its size demanded that it would live in a pack to hunt with. They would benefit from speed and numbers to overwhelm their prey, since their color scheme often was very bright and unfit for camouflage. The other carnivore that was kept and bred was the bigger Herrerasaurus. This predator was one of the earliest dinosaurs that roamed this globe, and is distinctive by its long and narrow snout. Its teeth work as razors to rip its prey apart, rather than kill it with the strength of its jaw. On first glance by some, they might be mistaken for bigger versions of raptors. They do also hunt in packs though, but there is very clear hierarchy where the alpha stands far above the others and does not tolerate any hesitation. Because of this though, there is often much tension to be found around the ranks on those attempting to become the new alpha. Alphas get to enjoy getting the first kill within captivity, but out in the open, it is to be believed that they would use a system similar to lions, where the females would hunt and then the alpha male would only have to worry about eating the captured prey, a luxury that the dinosaurs did not have in this case. This was way different with the Proceratosaurus, which showcased individual hunting attempts since their prey of goats were so small that overwhelming numbers were not necessary. A showcase of another duel was on display among the Hererosaurus. It was so common for this to happen, in fact, that it often was the case that a new alpha was victorious, not by its sheer strength, but because its opponent was weakened by a duel that happened not too long before. Their reigns were often short, but sweet. As these two carnivores were created too late to join the safari, many of the scientists wondered what would happen. Then a message came in from Site 10, Location F. At Location F, they had also created a dinosaur never before seen in the park, known as the Acrocanthosaurus, which was a carnivore resembling something like a stout T-Rex with a giant tail and large spines running along its back. Despite the Acrocanthosaurus being a sole hunter, they had created multiple of them and had applied the docile genome to have them live in harmony. Currently, they were in the process of performing tests on creating a large pen with only carnivores, and though their initial plan was to start with just the Acrocanthosaurus, they requested the other two types to be sent over from Location B, since the regular safari park had no use for them anyway. They currently had 4 Acrocanthosaurus, and they reportedly were working on creating many others to join inside the pen. The pen itself was very barren, flat without any trees, and only the absolute minimum requirement in water and food availability. The pen was purely for scientific purposes, and not for amusement, viewing pleasure, or to appease and give the dinosaurs a healthy environment. But apparently these dinosaurs still had it quite good compared to the living conditions at other sites and locations. Over the next few days, more and more dinosaurs were moved over from Location B to settle into their new home. The initial ones that were set loose quickly threw themselves at each other. They left their bigger brother alone, but realized that their smaller size made it possible to hurt one another. Since this would probably be happening throughout each cluster that was sent, the scientists and personnel required all dinosaurs that were sent over from Location B to be injected with the docile genes as well. And then over the next weeks, more and more dinosaurs were added to the giant pen. The number of all 3 types grew drastically, and though the population grew ever more, it was the Acrocanthosaurus that stuck out like a sore thumb due to their sheer size. One actually had to look closer in order to see the other 2 in between them. The color scheme of something like the Hererosaurus was also a bit less likely to jump out, as some, though not all, had quite a camouflage color pattern involving dark green. One could clearly see that the smaller 2 were still afraid or jittery amongst the bigger Acrocanthosaurus, despite the docile genes holding them down. It might still be the instinct that let them know from deep within that these were animals that they should not mess around with. Some interesting things did start to show with this experiment. The ever so dominant Hererosaurus alphas showed signs of fear or obedience when nearing an Acrocanthosaurus, thus diminishing his or her stature regarding other Hererosaurus. This often initiated a duel for a new alpha, far away from any Acrocanthosaurus, something that was easier said than done. What was also interesting was that though the pen itself was huge, all of the dinosaurs stayed only on one side of it and seemed to express no interest in a large part to the opposite. Since it was just plain ground, it might explain their disinterest. If some vegetation had been planted there, some might have gone over there to use its shade to get out of the hot sun. And when one were to look closer within the dinosaur territory itself, one would notice something even more interesting. The dinosaur types had actually claimed parts of the pen for their own. Though the Acrocanthosaurus, from afar, dominated the plains and area as a whole, in reality, they claimed the plains for themselves, where they roamed around, and the water spot belonged to the smaller types, only being disturbed by a larger Acrocanthosaurus when it needed a drink. Because of this, it was always chaos and noisy at the water spot, with both types running and screeching along as they splashed through the water. It was remarkable how the types had claimed parts of territory to coexist, yet be out of each other's way. And then, as the scientists looked on at the unique ecosystem they had created, One of them whispered softly, "What if we introduce an aggressive predator to this system?" Site 10, Location B. A site where, like so many others, experiments were done on the dinosaurs that had been created too late to be implemented in the popular safari park. For this particular site, they issued a large pen with only carnivores, which had been given the docile gene administration. The larger Acrocanthosaurus had claimed rights to the plains area of the pen, while only visiting the drinking spot held by the smaller types for a drink or two. They tolerated smaller dinosaurs, like the Herrerasaurus, to come on the plains and even let them sleep there. The next step in the experiment was to input an aggressive, larger predator in the system and see what would occur. For this particular experiment, a heavily modified Spinosaurus would be used to see if it could dominate this whole pen just on its own based on its modifications. But it would take some time before the Spinosaurus was created and flown over to location B. In the meantime, the scientists tried to spread out the herd of carnivores a bit more across the entire zone. All of the dinosaurs stayed fairly close to the drinking area, and they tried to attract them to the opposite side by expanding their feeders. Again, the pen itself was the bare minimum of what the dinosaurs needed. They had no shade in the form of vegetation. Everything needed to be visible for the scientists to put down on paper what they saw. They were also wondering what impact the Spinosaurus would have on the smaller dinosaurs like the Proceratosaurus, as it was more likely that the Spino would attack larger opponents first. And then finally, the Spinosaurus got released in the open. It already made a very aggressive stance, as it came out and immediately looked for its first victim.
The Spinosaurus, as expected, chose combat and conflict over primary necessities like food and water. Within this large cluster of other dinosaurs, it was difficult to assess if the first opponent was chosen with purpose or purely a coincidence. There was no matter of an alpha or matriarch within this large group of dinosaurs for him to fight. But the battle started to occur, and as one might expect, the buffed up Spinosaurus made short work of the other dinosaur. Now the interesting part was on how the other dinosaurs within the zone would react. Rising tensions and stress levels seemed a logical step, but utter chaos pretty much followed. With one dinosaur out of the way, the Spinosaurus already roamed around to look for another opponent, but at the same time, within all of this confusion, the other dinosaurs started to sometimes attack each other as well. It was most likely a direct reaction to feeling threatened, and this even echoed on down to the smaller dinosaurs that would react more jittery and even claw at one another. Within all this turmoil, the Spinosaurus did indeed find another victim. It was interesting to see if the winning spree of the Spino would continue, because even though it was juiced up, it did not mean that it would not run out of battery life. There would most likely come a point where it would grow tired, or at least needed to take a break with this many dinosaurs still up and running. But could a break even be taken within all this roaring and biting? As the afternoon progressed, the first corpses of the dinosaurs started to litter the ground of the carnivore zone. Up until now, there had been multiple fights, but the results of those fights had not really been on display yet. As time would continue on, more and more of this destruction would surely be noted as those that were still standing still slaughtered it out. What was very unique was how the other dinosaurs reacted to this aggressive behavior. Despite given aggression inhibitors, they also would not stop fighting, possibly a result of the sudden rise of stress and how they were not able to cope with an escalation like this. It was a sign that even with the inhibitors, caution still needed to be made. Though it did seem that their aggression was a form of self-protection or avoiding harm instead of hunting or settling dominance themselves. Most of these dinosaurs were probably simply scared.
Experiments at other locations were being prepared, as a few of the scientists got relieved while others stayed to note down the following days of progress with the Spinosaurus, which had adapted rather well to its environment. But of course, there would also come a point where it would run out of dinosaurs to fight, and then what would happen? Would its aggressive modification be so overwhelming that it would attack the fence to escape? There were many questions that still needed answering. Though some of the experiments happening on the different locations were positive in the sense to appease the dinosaurs' needs or how to make them happier or comfier, other experiments were harsh, like this one. The scientists that were relieved would go on to do similar experiments. Some higher-ups behind the curtain had the plans to overthrow Konoha Safari Park and make a park that was bigger yet cheaper to make by adhering to the absolute minimum necessities for the animals. All the while this would happen and be figured out, the scientists here would continue to sample the Spinosaurus' behavior. In the end, there were the scientists who indeed believed that the Spinosaurus was put in there to purely see on what the consequences would be. But as mentioned before, there were those who believed the Spinosaurus to be more of a weapon, and this string of battles be its weapon testing capabilities. Though it might seem noble to create a backup in case of any outbreak occurs again, what happens if the one who controls all gets their hands on this most powerful creature? The Spinosaurus was far from the most powerful creature on the island, though there were some who believed the manipulated animal would be facing other manipulated dinosaurs in the near future to determine the strongest. The scientists did not see themselves as evil, but history would show that one should never mess with Mother Nature, for it has a will of its own, and if provoked, will come down on those who disturb it with a powerful vengeance. With the many different sites and locations spread around the main island of the safari park and surrounding ones, it was difficult to keep track of what exactly was being experimented on. In Site 10, Location S, they were just about done preparing for new research to commence. For this, Austrian Dr. Hugo Steiner, who also oversaw the initial experiment revolving around the pen with just carnivores and who authorized the entry of the Spinosaurus, stood at the lead as his coldness towards the animals would benefit in this particular experiment. It had been whispered around the halls that one of the big financial sponsors of Kanoa Safari Park was interested in starting an amusement park with dinosaurs of their own. But they wanted to make profit by spending as little money as they could or needed to. Part of that would, of course, by having pens as small as possible, even going beyond the regulations and terms that park owners would need to abide with. But little was yet known about dinosaur behavior since they re-emerged on our planet in the 90s. To test this, Location S was going to let loose multiple dinosaurs in 3 pens that were ever getting smaller and monitor their behavior to determine what the tiniest size was and still keep the dinosaurs active and somewhat presentable. Steiner and the others were not interested in if the dinosaurs would be happy, bored, or find it hard to move around it. They just focused on the dollar signs and experimental breakthroughs and acknowledgement. At the same time, Steiner's minions were left behind at the pen with the upgraded Spinosaurus, which still continued to press its stamp on the carnivores it shared its cell with. The amount of dinosaurs had depleted greatly, though there were still a lot of the Acrocanthosaurus, since the Spinosaurus could only muster up strength and energy to fight so many before it needed a rest. One would think the others to attack it then, but most were too scared, since it almost had become a habit that the fearful Spino would roam around and pick its next victim. Remnants of the smaller carnivores were left out on the field, as were dozens of feeders that were used back in the day in order to spread the herd out more around the entire pen. Back at Location S, the first dinosaur was released in the biggest of the 3 pens. It was the Diplodocus, and they had chosen this dinosaur on purpose since it's built so horizontal. If there's one dinosaur to check on what it needs in terms of space, it is this one. The first pen was the size of a temporary exchange station that they used before flying in the dinosaurs to the safari park. They were usually not more than a day in one of these and often sedated, meaning they were not bothered by the lack of space. But here, the scientists would monitor the Diplodocus over several days and longer if need be on how it would react to the lack of movement space. But here, the scientists would monitor the Diplodocus over several days and longer if need be on how it would react to the lack of moving capabilities. For the second, and therefore smaller pen, an Ankylosaurus was released. Obviously, the first pen with the Diplodocus would be big enough for this particular herbivore, but they were known to be very agitated and easily upset. The scientists had a high chance of getting a reaction out of this dinosaur in response to its small living area. The initial results with the Diplodocus neighbor were that the lack of space did not agitate it, nor make it insane, though they weren't sure in the long run. The creature did look bored though, which could have its toll on lifespan and health, meaning more financial necessities for the ones paying the bills. A few scientists who pitied the beasts wrote a report that it might be more efficient for finances to invest in larger pens, as the dinosaurs would grow up healthier, meaning less hassle. There was another issue that the scientists ran into with the smaller pens than the one of the size of the exchange point. There was no room for possible feeders, meaning the food would have to be administered manually and daily, which again meant more expenses and manpower. Automation was preferred. Then, to make things even more interesting, at least in the eyes of the scientists, in this small pen, another Diplodocus was added as well. The Ankylosaurus was known to prefer being on its own, and it would be fascinating to see if these two could live in harmony in such a small environment. And once again, the dinosaurs did not display signs of aggression nor agitation, but did not move around almost at all due to the lack of turning capabilities. Especially for something as big as the Diplodocus, this could become a big problem in the long run. And as days went by, communications between Steiner's former position location and his current continued to intermingle. Despite the Spinosaurus still on his winning killing streak, the scientists had expected the creature to root out all resistance quicker than had happened. The upgraded Tyrant was supposed to be backup for if another dinosaur escape would occur, though there were some who believed the financial heads wanted the strongest dinosaur for leverage purposes. Even more so than before, the Acrocanthosaurus were driven towards the drinking pool, which was previously occupied by the smaller critters, but now housed the giant carnivores that awaited to be picked off by the Spinosaurus. As the Spinosaurus did not display as much aggressiveness or worked as fast as the scientists were hoping, first plans were made to look towards other dinosaurs, or maybe even stacking this Spinosaurus against another upgraded one to determine which was the strongest. Then finally, in location S, the dinosaurs were released in the final pen. This one was even smaller than the second one, and could not even house a drinking spot, making that mandatory for manual administration as well. Here, a Diplodocus was added too, though the scientists mostly had already come to the conclusion that the bare minimum of space was the size of the exchange point, since the addition of automated feeders and drinking areas would lower the overall costs together with the dinosaur's health being less of a concern. Though the Diplodocus did not show aggression, it was very clear that it was uncomfortable with its new living area. It was so small and cramped that multiple times it got its tail or neck stuck through the railing, leading to some scientists vowing for a solid wall fencing with a path for visitors above, rather than a regular fence like all the others. Lastly, Steiner vowed to make one final addition to the last pen. He wanted to see what would happen if a bigger carnivore was added here. Since there were no feeders, a large carnivore like a Carnotaur would have no other choice but to eat one of its penmates. But there was barely any enough room to brawl, let alone hunt. They wondered if because of that, the three types of dinosaurs would leave each other alone. And indeed, the Carnotaur did not attack the other dinosaurs it shared its small living cell with. But the Carnotaur was the first of the dinosaurs to clearly showcase signs of agitation due to the lack of movement space. As the scientists were now even discussing and wondering what would happen if even bigger carnivores were being introduced to a small pen like this, the Carnotaur set its gaze towards a fence that looked like a weak spot. If it were able to break out, the island would have another bloodbath on its hands. This time though, it of course would be kept under wraps, and fate would have it that right at that time, Hugo Steiner was right outside the facility. The experiment, initiated and formally led by Austrian doctor Hugo Steiner, involving an apex and modified Spinosaurus, continued. Though Steiner was no longer active on this site, his assistants continued to watch as the beefed-up Spinosaurus continued to slay its victims left and right, which diminished the dinosaur population in the pen noticeably. Where the giant field was first sprawling with carnivores, both big and small, all that was left now were a few Acrocanthosaurus that were still bunching up in the hopes not to be antagonized by the Spino. But the battles that occurred again and again, and would always favor the Spinosaurus, now took its toll on the mental health of some of the dinosaurs, as they now also attacked each other. Within the zone, Acrocanthosaurus could be seen with wounds inflicted not by the Spino, but by their fellow mates. It really emphasized exactly how much stress these dinosaurs were under with this experiment. The Spino itself also seemed to notice the lowering numbers of its potential challengers, and this for some reason made it more aggressive. The brutal predator either got annoyed, agitated, or maybe feeling confident about the fewer opponents, as it never seemed to be satisfied with its bloodlust. Battles now not only happened during the day, but also at night. Whenever the Spinosaurus would sleep, the other Acrocanthosaurus fed off the carcasses left behind, as most now completely ignored the feeders, another possible side effect because of the stress. With the battles now happening all throughout the day and night, the sight at dawn was horrifying, with the field just scattered with giant bodies, all creatures who perished in the name of science. At the same time, location S was where Dr. Steiner was currently staying. This site was used to measure the absolute minimum space that was required for the dinosaurs in order to build an amusement park rivaling Konoha's with the minimum effort in terms of dinosaur pens to lower the cost. Multiple dinosaurs were let loose in pens that were so small that no water or feeders could be implemented. One of those pens, the smallest, housed a Diplodocus, an Ankylosaurus, and a Carnotaur that did not attack the others since it was more occupied and stressed out about the lack of movement space. The scientists were more fascinated by the suppression of the hunting instinct and forgot that some of the dinosaurs might be pushed over the edge and would attack the fence. This time the fences were sturdier and electrified, and so the scientists and personnel felt at ease, which was a terrible mistake. But the few shocks that the Carnotaur got were nothing compared to it going insane in such a small environment. It was now pure instinct to live on that drove him to attack the fence over and over again. At the time, the scientists had assembled not too far from the pens to discuss data and results, but out of sight, meaning that they had no idea what was currently happening. The sound of the clashes were muffled by other dinosaurs roaring and helicopters going in and out, exchanging information from different sites. And then finally, the torture was over for the dinosaurs in the smallest pen. The Carnotaurus had broken out. It immediately stepped outside, stretching its legs and looking around the area. Again, the scientists had no idea, as they currently were not monitoring the pens, and most of the staff currently left from the meeting held nearby. As fate would have it, only Dr. Steiner, was still outside in the field, communicating the results of the meeting to his peers on different locations. He was so focused on himself that he did not even notice the ground shake and the thumping of loud footsteps coming closer. That is, he did not notice it until it was too late. When he dropped his communication device due to a sudden tremble, he looked back angrily, but that anger immediately was replaced with fear and disbelief. In front of him stood the Carnotaur, exhausted, hurt, and hungry from lack of food. These were all the results that were set in motion by Dr. Steiner himself. And in this shock, Dr. Steiner tripped, wanting to scream, but no sound could be heard. All he could see were the rows of sharp teeth, and for the first time ever, he saw a dinosaur for what it really was. A powerful creature that needed to be respected as it had the power to kill, not a mere science project. And like so many novels had said in ink, Dr. Steiner was eaten and killed by that which he helped create. It was a sense of poetic justice by Mother Nature once again. But with the Carnotaur breaking the fencing, it of course now also meant that the other dinosaurs could escape as well. The Ankylosaurus was the first to enjoy the blessings of freedom, and it took a while for the Diplodocus to notice it too. The Diplodocus was a bit slower of mind dinosaur, but a kind one at that. It must have been the most excruciating for the Diplodocus in that small pen, due to its size, and one could visibly see the instant stress relief it got when it walked over the open fields. By now, the other staff noticed what had happened, and an evacuation of Location S was immediately put into motion. Due to all the commotion, the Carnotaur left the facility site and headed out in the open as well. It turned out that because of this, the only human lost during this occurrence was Dr. Hugo Steiner. With the evacuation in progress, the dinosaurs actually had the chance to escape and head into the wild. Parts of the island were still flooded with wild and free dinosaurs, in which these newcomers could be integrated very well. The other dinosaurs in the bigger, but still very small pens also noticed the breach, and this triggered them too to level the fencing and enjoy the beauty of freedom. The first thing most of the dinosaurs wanted was a drink, especially the ones from the smallest pen, since there was not even room to lay down a drinking spot there. The dinosaurs were weak, but over time they would regain their strength and enjoy life at the fullest for the first time. And despite some of the locations and sites being awful, a lot of them also did really good work for the dinosaurs. For example, Site K Location O had just finished the creation of new dinosaurs that actually got greenlit to be added to the safari park after expansions were planned. Or facilities like the one at Site H, Location 3, which had just created feeders for the dinosaurs, which required a more wetland type of environment. But back at the carnivore pen, things continued their own horrible way, as now the last of the Acrocanthosaurus were left. It was also not the case of an example of survival of the fittest. The carnivores that were left were simply still alive because fate would have it that the Spinosaurus had not chosen them to duel. By now, also the next step with the Spinosaurus was put down for the scientists on a need-to-know basis. Similar experiments with manipulated dinosaurs had been going on elsewhere on different sites and locations. These spiced up predators would now be faced against each other if they managed to successfully root every other dinosaur from the pen they were currently in. And on one particular night, the message was thrown into the public that the Spinosaurus was the only dinosaur left alive. It was time for the Spino to now meet some opponents that were very similar to her. With the safari park going swell as always, while preparations were made for expansion, the various sites and locations continued with their research, some bad and some good. To one of these sites, Claire Deering was sent over, who had hands-on experience on several islands before the first zoo was even built that stood as the blueprint for the current safari park. The reason for her visit was, however, not a pleasant one.
I returned to Isla Nublar with a sense of excitement and dread. This is where I experienced some of the greatest accomplishments of my life. And tragically, my most regrettable failures. But I've learned so much since then. About the dinosaurs, about this island, and about myself. So, welcome back. This time we do better, and when we leave on our terms.
A volcano on one of the islands showed heavy signs of activity and could possibly erupt. It was not a danger for the entire set of islands, but for the current one and its near vicinity, it could have disastrous effects were it to erupt. The dinosaurs nearby showed heavy signs of stress, but also a weird type of disease that seemed to have hit most of them. Claire's team was about to make sure that some of these animals could be saved.
We both know why we're here. It's time to save these animals. But we can only succeed if we work together. Let's get started. We've been given a limited budget to get this operation up and running. First, we need to restore the power. Nublar's existing power network should suffice once it's operational, but we won't have the capacity to extend it.
Don't mind me, Miss Deering. I'm here to observe and report. Oh, and make sure the Foundation's investment isn't being misused, even if it is limited. I may also occasionally offer my trademark witty interjections and winning smile.
In order to do that, several facilities were built, and of course they needed power, which currently could not be established. Though a power station and grid had previously been built on this part of the island, part of the lines had been broken down. A team of rangers would be needed in order to repair the lines and reroute the power back up again in order to get the facilities online and ready to receive the dinosaurs.
Returning to this island brings back so many memories. Not all of them bad, mind you. We did a lot of great work on Isla Nublar. Simon Mizrani, he was a good man. He realized John Hammond's vision. A dream, before it became a nightmare. In a strange way, this feels like coming home. I started here as an intern a lifetime ago. We gave the dinosaurs a second chance. Well, here I am, getting one myself, even as Isla Nublar explodes into chaos.
During their journey across the island, it became apparent to the rangers how dinosaurs had been living here too, free and mostly uninterrupted by men, while nature once again took its course.
I said that I'd never come back here. But deep down, I knew I would. Isla Nublar. I am forever linked to this island. And to the events that showed us who really was in charge. But this time, we can make it right. Or at least better. And I'm not here for me. I'm here for them. The dinosaurs. They're still my responsibility. And now, they're yours as well. Together we can show the world how important these prehistoric animals are to our future.
There was vegetation that they had never seen before, and some were even speculating that there could be dinosaurs here too that had not been seen anywhere else. It also seemed to be quite peaceful, with no predators seen anywhere. The dinosaurs that were encountered were all herbivores that walked across the plains and wetlands in small herds, quite sporadically. Finally, after having followed the electrical grid for so long, they arrived at the source, which needed repairs as well. And so the facility was back online and could start receiving dinosaurs.
All right, you've got the power back online. Now we need more facilities in place to continue our work.
Does a coffee machine work now? Finally! That was the longest I've been without caffeine since 1993.
For the most important part, the dinosaurs. Our primary concern is their welfare, which means finding the cause of this sickness. My team have identified some animals, and they want to take a closer look.
Now, it wasn't possible to retrieve all dinosaurs, but they had some plans on what to do with those that were rescued. First, specimens from a few types would need to be flown in. The map grid actually showed lots of dinosaur activity around and further away from the base camp. For the moment, they would send out rangers to go and get some of the Gallimimus, a dinosaur that was small and easy to please in an enclosed environment. The Gallimimus preferred the open plains, where it could run together with its flock looking for food or water. Therefore, necessities like a thick jungle forest were not required, making it all the more easy to capture and research on what was causing the spread of disease around these parts. Its neighboring Stratiomimus got a bit scared though from all the ruckus that the choppers were raising. Gallimimus fell numb to the ground that were tranked, triggering some of the other dinosaurs to run away in fear. And so the Gallimimus that were tranked were moved over to the base camp with a newly created pen built specifically for them. It also just so happened that within arm's reach, a group of Sinoceratops was enjoying a nice refreshing drink at one of the smaller pools of water near the base. These were a given to be saved as well, as they could be tranked easily. There were some who vouched for the ground rangers to do this, but it was easier to just send out the helicopters again. Just like with the smaller runner dinosaurs, once the first of the Sinoceratops went down, the others panicked a little bit and started to run as well. But they were so massive that they could easily be shot with the darts. The vegetation surrounding the water was the only thing that was in the way, and so the first inhabitants enjoyed their new temporary home. Currently, there wasn't much vegetation in the form of trees, but these dinosaurs did not need it. They mostly were concerned with grazing and some fresh water to cool off from the scorching sun. And as in the background the smoke could be seen coming from the volcano, more of the earlier tranked Gallimimus were flown in to create a nice flock within the pen itself. The next dinosaur that was needed was the ever so feisty Stygimoloch. Not too far from that site, a bunch of Pachyes were also spotted, but the Stygimoloch was definitely the one with the easier agitated personality. But now, they seemed rather quaint and still, possibly the result of the disease that was spreading. Their instinct to run did kick in once more though when the helicopters came. Luckily, they ran into the open, making it easier for the rangers to take them down, as the smaller size and jitteriness of these creatures could make that task a difficult one. The Stygimoloch were quite far from the base camp, and it would take some time before all of them had been moved to the new pen. Despite them being rather agitated, the Stygimoloch was also a dinosaur that did not require a whole lot of specifics in terms of its environment. As long as there were enough of their own kind, they were solid. Signals had already been given for the helicopters to deliver their payload, and the two species that had already been introduced to their pen seemed to really like their new home. It did indeed result, unsurprisingly, in that most of the animals would center and reside around the watering spot, since some of the rocks also provided shade. Part of the water could later on also be researched if anything could be found in connection to the disease. And then the Stygimoloch were finally added into the mix, and for now, these species would be the focus of the base camp and their scientists.
Great. Now that we have the dinosaurs, time to learn everything we can about this illness. Build an observation tower overlooking the enclosure so our scientists can carefully observe what they're doing.
Since this base camp was so small, much of the research was not on the same level as places elsewhere on the island. Since Claire knew that some shady things were happening in a few of these sites and locations, she wanted to keep this operation in-house. While the materials and crew for the viewing platform were assembled, one of the rangers got a nice glimpse of a friendly group of Stegosaurus that moved through the camp. They would definitely be safe in the near future as well, when they had bigger pens built. Shortly after, the first of the 2 viewing platforms were being built. With the pen having no trees, it was very easy for large groups of scientists to write down their findings on the current situation. More in-depth research would need to take place to delve into the cause and identity of this disease, but through this, they could study their behavior from an outer perspective.
Our scientists are in position and ready to observe the dinosaurs. Your job is to make sure the dinosaurs remain comfortable and contained.
And comfortable and calm they indeed were. Even with the 3rd species being introduced, all the different dinosaurs seemed to be quite pleased. Because of the openness of the pen, all the dinosaurs had a good understanding of what was going on around them at all times, making them feel at ease. They would remain here a bit longer while the scientists would study the disease, and then they would be handed over to Konoha's men, who had a great new plan worked out for these dinosaurs that had been stressed out for the past few weeks due to the disease and volcano. A dinosaur spa. With the dinosaurs being evacuated from the island, there were many other sites on some of the scattered smaller peninsulas further away that could continue their research. And where some of the scientists' interiors were pure malice and being very morally ambiguous, luckily there were those with great intentions too. With the head scientist, Steiner, being eaten, the other heads would soon roll as well, though not literally like with Steiner. The higher-ups got word of some of these secret tests and how morally wrong they were for the animals in question, and thus a whole bunch of leads and officials were rounded up and arrested. It was decided to swoop up many of these test sites and make way for easier to monitor goals like a new safari park or zoo. With the success of the first safari park, it was but a logical step to want to rebuild the zoo once more, especially with how many new dinosaurs were discovered and added in the last couple of months. But it was not only that. Recently, a handful of scientists had discovered how to splice and mix-match new DNA strings to create dinosaurs from scratch, meaning that now the sky was the limit on what they could make. Some even joked about making prehistoric mammals, but for now, this news about modified custom dinosaurs spread like wildfire. It would not be made official yet to the press, but 3 different dinosaur types were customly created to showcase to the park's higher-ups on what the scientists potentially could make. To showcase properly what was possible on paper, they had created 3 distinctly different types of dinosaurs. The first was the majestic and gigantic Brachiosaurus. This dinosaur was still being heavily debated upon if it actually existed in this particular state. The evidence that was found of this magnificent animal was thought to belong to a Brachiosaurus for the longest of times. It was only more recent that alternative hypotheses were written down, and with the gathered intel and documents on these findings, this dinosaur was created. It showcased that the scientists could even create dinosaurs if findings on it were incomplete. The end result then, of course, most likely would differ quite heavily from what this creature actually looked like when it was alive and well, but it gave way to a vast amount of possible creations. Another dinosaur that was customly created without any prior research done with the dinosaurs introduced in the earlier parks was the Cosmoceratops. This Triceratops look-alike was a beautiful creation with spikes and frills that went in many different directions. Where the size would often function to impress potential mates, the sharpness or angle would function as a defensive mechanism, the overall shape with the Cosmoceratops would then often be used as a species recognition within a larger herd of herbivores. The curled frills looked almost cute, but made sure that all of the Cosmoceratops would stick together as one. Their horns pointed a bit outward, to where they would often not choose to fight, but instead run, and therefore it was important not to lose sight of one another within this chaos. Obviously, the size of the dinosaur was very different than the earlier showcased Titan, but this one was as impressive and beautifully recreated since so much more information on it was available. The final dinosaur that was on display was a tiny one, but nonetheless very impressive. It was the very exotic JWE, and this was once again a creature that was not a whole lot known about. The little evidence that was found originated from Latin America. Therefore, the scientists altered its color patterns and vibrancy to simulate that of tropical birds or other creatures found in the jungle. This showcased well on how the scientists could take freedom and workarounds to still make these mysteries come to life. It showed that even with the smaller creatures, they could still make a large variety see the light of day, and with this in mind, they asked the heads and higher-ups to already think about what potential dinosaurs they would want to see in this park, because this new zoo would focus on adding these customly created dinosaurs, never before seen creatures in any of the earlier built parks. They would try to mix and match as many different creatures and make it the largest prehistoric zoo yet, but that would all be done in due time.